there. Welcome back to the Cory Doctorow podcast, the last one for a couple of weeks because we're coming up on the holidays. Those of you who came out to see me this weekend in London for the London launch of Rapture of the Nerds, nice to see you. And those of you in the UK who want another bite at the apple, as it were, can catch me before I go off on holidays. I'll be in Bradford at 8 Squared Con, the 64th National Science Fiction Convention, EasterCon in the UK next weekend. And it should be very good fun. I'm doing a whole ton of events, including one for people who aren't attending the con, which I'll have more details of on the website very soon. So follow me on Twitter or check out the website, Craphound or Boing Boing, and I'll post the details of that. We're going to do something at a local library. In any event, it's been a great week since I last spoke to you. My wife has already left for California. She's over at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, leaving me alone with our daughter, and we've had a great daddy-daughter weekend. In addition to the aforementioned launch of Rapture of the Nerds, I got to see her at dance class, or as she says, dance class, performing in Goldilocks and the Three Bez. They had their annual recital, which was a 10-minute adaptation of Goldilocks and the Three Bez for 5-year-olds in leotards with screaming and hysterics. None of which were posies, I'm happy to say. And we saw the Croods, which thankfully wasn't in 3D. And we went to the Medieval Banquet, which is more or less what it sounds like, a place where guys in chainmail hit each other with blunt swords and acrobats perform, and a actor dressed up like Henry VIII sings and wassails at you, and you hoist pints of ale and call your waitress a wench and get to dress up like knights and princesses of old, if knights and princesses of old dressed in a lot of rayon. But it was good fun, and we had some crafts. We painted D&D miniatures. We also did some baking. We tried a recipe that I posted to Boing Boing last year, where you fill up hollow eggshells with brownie mixture and then bake the hollow eggshells in the oven in little tinfoil nests inside a muffin tin, so that you end up with eggshells that you crack open and there's a brownie inside. Ours did not work nearly so well, but it was still good fun to make, and lots of fun. Anyway, the Easter holidays are coming up, and so this is my last podcast, I believe, for 2 weeks. I'll be in California with some family. My parents are going to come out, and my wife, as I say, is already out there, and I'll see some of my Boing Boing co-editors. And in the meantime, I'm going to read to you some more from Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. If I just faded out there, that was me reaching for my now very dog-eared and marked up reader copy of Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. As I say, I'm working on a sequel to this, or rather probably a prequel. And for those of you who've been asking for a hint about what it's going to be about, it's approximately speaking going to be about the end of work. I guess that's a good way of talking about it. If you read Kevin Kelly's piece on the robot economy, that's a good piece on it. If you heard this week's This American Life on disability insurance, that's another piece of the puzzle. I know that I'm in book writing mode, because everywhere I look I seem to see bits and pieces of this story, and certainly as I read through this Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom copy to you, bits and pieces of the story occurred to me. So I'm going to read to you now Chapter 1 from Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, and I hope you enjoy it. Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, Chapter 1. My girlfriend was 15% of my age, and I was old-fashioned enough that it bugged me. Her name was Lil, and she was second-generation Disney World, her parents being among the original adhocracy that took over management of Liberty Square and Tom Sawyer Island. She was quite literally raised in Walt Disney World, and it showed. It showed. She was neat and efficient in her every little thing, from her shining red hair to her careful accounting of each gear and cog in the animatronics that were in her charge. Her folks were in canopic jars in Kissimmee, deadheading for a few centuries. On a muggy Wednesday, we dangled our feet over the edge of the Liberty Bells riverboat pier, watching the listless Confederate flag over Fort Langhorne on Tom Sawyer Island by moonlight. The Magic Kingdom was all closed up, and every last guest had been chased out the gate underneath Main Street train station, and we were able to breathe a heavy sigh of relief, shuck parts of our costumes, and relax together while the cicadas sang. I was more than a century old, but there was still a kind of magic in having my arm around the warm, fine shoulders of a girl by moonlight, hidden from the hustle of the cleaning teams by the turnstiles, breathing in the warm, moist air. Lil plumped her head against my shoulder and gave me a butterfly kiss under my jaw. Her name was McGill, I sang gently. But she called herself Lil, she sang, warm breath on my collarbones. And everyone knew her as Nancy, I sang. I'd been startled to know that she knew the Beatles. They'd been old news in my youth, after all, but her parents had given her a thorough, if eclectic, education. Want to do a walkthrough, she asked. It was one of her favorite duties, exploring every inch of the rides in her care with the lights on, after the horde of tourists had gone. We both liked to see the underpinnings of the magic. Maybe that was why I kept picking at the relationship. I'm a little pooped. Let's sit a while longer, if you don't mind. She heaved a dramatic sigh. Oh, all right, old man. She reached up and gently tweaked my nipple, and I gave a satisfying little jump. I think the age difference bothered her, too, though she teased me for letting it get to me. I think I'll be able to manage a totter through the haunted mansion if you just give me a moment to rest my bursitis. I felt her smile against my shirt. She loved the mansion, loved to turn on the ballroom ghosts and dance their waltz with them on the dusty floor, loved to try and stare down the marble busts in the library that followed your gaze as you passed. I liked it too, but I really just liked sitting there with her, watching the water and the trees. I was just getting ready to go when I heard a soft ping inside my cochlea. Damn, I said, I've got a call. Tell him you're busy, she said. I will, I said, and answered the call subvocally. Julius here. Hi, Julius. It's Dan. You got a minute? I knew 1,000 Dans, but I recognized the voice immediately, though it had been 10 years since we last got drunk at the Gazoo together. I muted the subvocal and said, Lil, I've got to take this. Do you mind? Oh, no, not at all, she sarcased at me. She sat up and pulled out her crack pipe and lit up. Dan, I subvocalized. Long time no speak. Yeah, buddy, it sure has been, he said, and his voice cracked on a sob. I turned and gave Lil such a look she dropped her pipe. How can I help, she said, softly but swiftly. I waved her off and switched the phone to full vocal mode. My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the cricket-punctuated calm. Where are you at, Dan? I asked. Down here in Orlando. I'm stuck out on Pleasure Island. All right, I said. Meet me at the Adventurers Club, upstairs on the couch by the door. I'll be there in... I shot a look at Lil, who knew the cast member-only roads better than I. She flashed 10 fingers at me. 10 minutes. Okay, he said. Sorry. He had his voice back under control. I switched off. What's up, Lil asked. I'm not sure. An old friend is in town. He sounds like he's got a problem. Lil pointed a finger at me and made a trigger-squeezing gesture. There, she said. I've just dumped the best route to Pleasure Island into your public directory. Keep me in the loop, okay? I set off for the Utilidor entrance near the Hall of Presidents and booted down the stairs to the hum of the underground tunnel system. I took the slidewalk to the cast parking and zipped my little cart out to Pleasure Island. I found Dan sitting on the L-shaped couch underneath rows of faked-up trophy shots with humorous captions. Downstairs, cast members were working the animatronic masks and idols, chattering with the guests. Dan was apparent 50-plus, a little paunchy and stubbled. He had raccoon mask bags under his eyes, and he slumped listlessly. As I approached, I pinged his woofie, and was startled to see that it had dropped to nearly 0. Jesus, I said as I sat down next to him. You look like hell, Dan. He nodded. Appearances can be deceptive, he said, but in this case, they're bang on. You want to talk about it, I asked. Somewhere else, huh? I hear they ring in the new year every night at midnight. I think that'd be a little too much for me right now. I let him out to my cart and cruised back to the place I shared with Lil, out in Kissimmee. He smoked 8 cigarettes on the 20-minute ride, hammering one after another into his mouth, filling my runabout with stinging clouds. I kept glancing at him in the rear view. He had his eyes closed, and in repose he looked dead. I could hardly believe that this was my vibrant action hero pal of yore. Surreptitiously, I called Lil's phone. I'm bringing him home, I subvocalized. He's in rough shape, not sure what it's all about. I'll make up the couch, she said, and get some coffee together. Love you. Back at you, kid, I said. As we approached the tacky little sway-backed ranch house, he opened his eyes. You're a pal, Jules. I waved him off. No, really. I tried to think of who I could call, and you were the only one. I missed you, bud. Lil said she put some coffee on, I said. You sound like you need it. Lil was waiting on the sofa, a folded blanket and an extra pillow on the side table, a pot of coffee and some Disneyland Beijing mugs beside them. She stood and extended her hand. I'm Lil, she said. Dan, he said. It's a pleasure. I knew she was pinging his woofie, and I caught her look of surprised disapproval. Us oldsters who predate woofie know that it's important, but to the kids, it's the world. Someone without any is automatically suspect. I watched her recover quickly, smile, and surreptitiously wipe her hand on her jeans. Coffee, she said. Oh, yeah, Dan said, and slumped on the sofa. She poured him a cup and set it on a coaster on the coffee table. I'll let you boys catch up then, she said, and started for the bedroom. No, Dan said. Wait, if you don't mind, I think it'd help if I could talk to someone, younger, too. She set her face in the look of chirpy helpfulness that all the second-gen cast members have at their instant disposal, and settled into an armchair. She pulled out her pipe and lit a rock. I went through my crack period just before she was born, just after they made it decaf, and I always felt odd when I saw her and her friends light up. Dan surprised me by holding out a hand to her and taking the pipe. He toked heavily and then passed it back. Dan closed his eyes again, then ground his fists into them, sipped his coffee. It was clear he was trying to figure out where to start. I believed that I was braver than I really am, is what it boils down to, he said. Who doesn't, I said. I really thought I could do it. I knew that someday I'd run out of things to do, things to see. I knew that I'd finish someday. You remember we used to argue about it. I swore I'd be done and that would be the end of it. And now here I am. There isn't a single place left on world that isn't a part of the bitchin' society. There isn't a single thing left that I want any part of. So deadhead for a few centuries, I said. Put the decision off. No, he shouted, startling both of us. I'm done. It's over. So do it, Lil said. I can't, he sobbed and buried his face in his hands. He cried like a baby in great snoring sobs that shook his whole body. Lil went into the kitchen and got some tissue and passed it to me. I sat alongside him and awkwardly patted his back. Jesus, he said into his palms. Jesus. Dan, I said quietly. He sat up and took the tissue, wiped off his face and hands. Thanks, he said. I tried to make a go of it, really I have. I spent the last 8 years in Istanbul writing papers on my missions, about the communities. I did some follow-up studies, interviews. No one was interested, not even me. I smoked a lot of hash. Didn't help. So one morning I woke up and went to the bazaar and said goodbye to the friends I'd made there. Then I went to a pharmacy and had the man make me up a lethal injection. He wished me good luck and I went back to my rooms. I sat there with a hypo all afternoon and then I decided to sleep on it and I got up the next morning and did it all over again. I looked inside myself and saw I didn't have the guts. I just didn't have the guts. I've stared down the barrels of 100 guns. I've had 1,000 knives pressed up against my throat, but I did not have the guts to press that button. You were too late, Lil said. We both turned to look at her. You were a decade too late. Look at you. You're pathetic. If you killed yourself right now, you'd just be a washed-up loser who couldn't hack it. If you'd done it 10 years earlier, you would have been going out on top, a champion, retiring permanently. She set her mug down with a harder-than-necessary clunk. Sometimes Lil and I are right on the same wavelength. Sometimes it's like she's on a different planet. All I could do was sit there horrified, and she was happy to discuss the timing of my pal's suicide. But she was right, and I saw that he knew it too. A day late and $1 short, he sighed. Well, don't just sit there, she said. You know what you've got to do. What? I said, involuntarily irritated by her tone. She looked at me like I was being deliberately stupid. He's got to get back on top, cleaned up, dried out, into some productive work. Get that woofie up, too. Then he can kill himself with dignity. It was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. Dan, though, was cocking an eyebrow at her and thinking hard. How old did you say you were? He said. "23, she said. "Wish I'd had your smarts at 23, he said, and heaved a sigh, straightening up. "Can I stay here while I get the job done?" I looked askance at Lil, who considered for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, pal, sure," I said. I clapped him on the shoulder. "You look beat." "Beat doesn't begin to cover it," he said. "Good night, then," I said. Chapter 2. Adhocracy works well for the most part. Lil's folks had taken over the running of Liberty Square with a group of other interested, compatible souls. They did a fine job, racked up gobs of woofie, and anyone who came around and tried to take it over would be so reviled by the guests that they wouldn't find a pot to piss in. Or they'd have such a wicked, radical approach that they'd ouster Lil's parents and their pal and do a better job. It can break down, though. There were pretenders to the throne, a group who'd worked with the original adhocracy and then moved off to other pursuits. Some of them had gone to school, some of them had made movies, written books, or gone off to Disneyland Beijing to help start things up. A few had deadheaded for a couple decades. They came back to Liberty Square with a message. Update the attractions. The Liberty Square ad hocs were the staunchest conservatives in the Magic Kingdom, preserving the wheezing technology in the face of a park that changed almost daily. The newcomer old-timers were on side with the rest of the park, had their support, and looked like they might make a successful go of it. So it fell to Lil to make sure that there were no bugs in the meager attractions of Liberty Square, the Hall of the Presidents, the Liberty Bell Riverboat, and the glorious Haunted Mansion, arguably the coolest attraction to come from the fevered minds of the old-time Disney Imagineers. I caught her backstage at the Hall of the Presidents, tinkering with Lincoln 2, the backup animatronic. Lil tried to keep 2 of everything running at speed, just in case. She could swap out a dead bot for a backup in 5 minutes flat, which is all that crowd control would permit. It had been 2 weeks since Dan's arrival, and though I'd barely seen him in that time, his presence was vivid in our lives. Our little ranch house had a new smell, not unpleasant, of rejuve and hope and loss, something barely noticeable over the tropical flowers nodding in front of our porch. My phone rang 3 or 4 times a day, Dan checking in from his rounds of the park, seeking some way to accumulate personal capital. His excitement and dedication to the task were inspiring, pulling me into his over-the-top and damn-the-torpedoes mode of being. "You just missed Dan," she said. She had her head in Lincoln's chest, working with an auto solder and a magnifier. Bent over, red hair tied back in a neat bun, sweat sheening her wiry, freckled arms, smelling of girl sweat and machine lubricant, she made me wish there was a mattress somewhere backstage. I settled for patting her behind affectionately, and she wriggled appreciatively. "He's looking better." His rejuve had taken him back to apparent 25, the way I remembered him. He was raw-boned and leathery, but still had the defeated stoop that had startled me when I saw him at the Adventurers Club. What did he want? He's been hanging out with Deborah. He wanted to make sure I knew what she's up to. Deborah was one of the old guard, a fellow comrade of Lil's parents. She'd spent a decade in Disneyland Beijing coding sim rides. If she had her way, we'd tear down every marvelous Rube Goldberg in the park and replace them with pristine white sim boxes on giant articulated servos. The problem was that she was really good at coding sims. Her great movie ride rehab at MGM was breathtaking. The Star Wars sequence had already inspired 100 fan sites that fielded millions of hits. She'd leveraged her success into a deal with the Adventureland ad hocs to rehab Pirates of the Caribbean, and their backstage areas were piled high with reference, treasure chests and cutlasses and bowspirits. It was terrifying to walk through. Pirates was the last ride Walt personally supervised, and we thought it was sacrosanct. But Deborah had built a pirate sim in Beijing based on Chen Yisao, the 19th century Chinese pirate queen, which was credited with rescuing the park from obscurity and ruin. The Florida iteration would incorporate the best aspects of its Chinese cousin, the AI-driven sims that communicated with each other and with the guests, greeting them by name each time they rode and spinning age-appropriate tales of piracy on the high seas, the spectacular fly-through of the aquatic necropolis of rotting junks on the seafloor, the thrilling pitch and yaw of the sim as it weathered a violent, breathtaking storm, but with Western themes. Wafts of Jamaican pepper sauce crackling through the air, liquid Afro-Caribbean accents, and sword fights conducted in the manner of the pirates who plied the blue waters of the New World. Identical sims would stack like cordwood in the space currently occupied by the bulky ride apparatus and dioramas, quintupling capacity and halving load time. So what's she up to? Lil extracted herself from the rail splitter's mechanical guts and made a comical moo of worry. She's rehabbing the pirates and doing an incredible job. They're ahead of schedule and they've got good net buzz. The focus groups are coming themselves. The comedy went out of her expression, bearing genuine worry. She turned away and closed up Honest Abe, then fired her finger at him. Smoothly, he began to run through his spiel, silent but for the soft hum and whine of his servos. Lil Mine twiddling a knob, and his audio track kicked in low. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined could not by force make a track on the Blue Ridge, nor take a drink from the Ohio. If destruction be our lot, then we ourselves must be its author, and its finisher. She mimed, turning down the gain, and he fell silent again. You said it, Mr. President, she said, and fired her finger at him again, powering him down. She bent and adjusted his hand-sewn period topcoat, then carefully wound and set the turnip watch in his vest pocket. I put my arm around her shoulders. You're doing all you can, and it's good work, I said. I'd fallen into the easy cast member mode of speaking, voicing bland affirmations. Hearing the words, I felt a flush of embarrassment. I pulled her into a long, hard hug and fumbled for better reassurance. Finding no words that would do, I gave her a final squeeze and let her go. She looked at me sidelong and nodded her head. It's fine, of course, she said. I mean, the worst possible scenario is that Deborah will do her job very, very well and make things even better than they are now. It's not so bad. This was a 180-degree reversal of her position on the subject the last time we'd talked, but you don't live more than a century without learning when to point out that sort of thing and when not to. My cochlea struck 12 noon and a HUD appeared with a weekly backup reminder. Lil was maneuvering Ben Franklin 2 out of his niche. I waved goodbye at her back and walked away to an uplink terminal. Once I was close enough for secure broadband communications, I got ready to back up. My cochlea chimed again and I answered it. Yes, I subvocalized impatiently. I hated getting distracted from a backup. One of my enduring fears was that I'd forget the backup altogether and leave myself vulnerable for an entire week until the next reminder. I'd lost the knack of getting into habits in my adolescence, giving in completely to machine-generated reminders over conscious choice. It's Dan. I heard the sound of the park in full swing behind him, children's laughter, bright recorded animatronic spiels, the tromp of thousands of feet. Can you meet me at the Tiki Room? It's pretty important. Can I wait for 15, I asked. Sure, see you in 15. I rung off and initiated the backup. A status bar zipped across a HUD, dumping the parts of my memory that were purely digital. Then it finished and started in on organic memory. My eyes rolled back in my head, and my life flashed before my eyes. All right, that's it. I'll talk to you in 3 weeks. I hope you have a great Easter break, spring break, and I hope if you come to EasterCon that you'll come up and say hello. Bye. You've been listening to the Cory Doctorow podcast, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike US 3.0, or as Woody Guthrie put it in another context, this song is copyrighted in the US under seal of copyright 154085 for a period of 28 years, and anyone caught singing it without our permission will be a mighty good friend of ourn, because we don't give a darn. Publish it, write it, sing it, swing to it, yodel it, we wrote it, that's all we wanted to do. Many thanks to John Taylor Williams for mastering. That's Ryneck Studio, WRYNECK Studio at gmail.com. John Taylor Williams is a full-time self-employed audio engineer, producer, composer, and sound designer. In his free time, he makes beer, jewelry, odd musical instruments, and furniture. He likes to meditate, to read, and to cook. Talk to you next week.